Now, if you're a true glutton for punishment, you'll follow me through this last step. We've done so much work. We've read a poem closely. We've asked questions of ourselves. We've answered those questions. We've done research. We've written a primary source paper. We've written a research paper. So I'd like to show you something maybe you've never seen. A professional, polished student research paper. So obviously my name isn't Norman Conquest. I thought I'd make a very lame joke. I've revised the title from my original. And I'm just going to walk you through this. Okay, maybe that you'll find that this helps. No, you haven't aged a bit. Essential lies in Shakespeare's Sonnet 138. The sonnets of William Shakespeare are known for their elevation of the beloved and the belief that poetry itself can help the beloved live forever. So we begin with a general sentence, right? Sonnet 138, however, approaches the topic of love in an untraditional manner. The speaker of this sonnet struggles both with himself and his lover, repeatedly questioning himself about the lies he and his lover tell each other to keep their relationship alive. The speaker of Sonnet 138 uses, so what I've done up to this point is I gradually narrow, and now I'm at my thesis, the most narrow sentence. The speaker of Sonnet 138 uses the multiple meanings of words to craft a complex, paranoid tone that highlights the complicated nature of his relationship. So what does that tone do? Don't stop at just what's literally happening. Say why it's important. The tone that's created by using the multiple meaning of words does two things. It highlights the complicated nature of his relationship and the fact that he eventually accepts lying proves critical in sustaining the bond that exists in his life. A lot going on there. Some teachers might think this is too complex, and maybe we can revise it to be even more clear and concise. What's good about this is that I can disagree with it, and that there's some meat to this bone here. There's meat. I'm not just saying the speaker of Sonnet 138 is disturbed or he's struggling. I say what the struggle is and why the struggle is important. First body paragraph. Sonnet 138 begins like a traditional love poem, but then quickly devolves into a paranoid rant. So that is a topic sentence. That says what the paragraph's going to do. Then I have a context sentence. I'm about to talk about the beginning of the poem. The poem opens by bluntly linking the beloved to truth itself. Then I have a quote sentence, and I always start my quote sentences with whoever's talking and a verb. There's no law that says you have to do that. I just like papers where I never have to stop and wonder what's going on. And if the reader always knows the context in which the speaker is speaking, who's speaking, and then a verb, the reader is clear on all that information and can read your paper fluidly. When my love swears that she's made of truth, I do believe her. Immediately we see the importance of oath-making, since the word swears holds grave significance for Shakespeare's audience. So that's my first inference. Here we have a relationship based on rock-solid loyalty and honesty. All right. So continuing from the previous page, one scholar adds to the opening line's insistence on the beloved's purity. So here, I've given my inferences on the quotation. Now I'm going to start including the inferences of professional scholars. Editor of the Arden edition of Shakespeare's Sonnets, Catherine Duncan Jones, states that maid of truth is a pun on maid, signifying virgin. And I'm even looking here. See what's missing? A quote mark. Okay, so you always can go back and revise. So this is a really interesting note. The first connection of the poem, seen here in Duncan Jones's comment, yokes the beloved's words to her chastity, an essential link for the speaker. This positive tone shifts at the end of the second line after the caesura, or pause. The speaker adds, though I know she lies. So early in the poem, the reader's left to wonder why the speaker believes someone who lies. Sometimes it's good just to ask these blunt, obvious questions, because the answers to them, your proposed answers to them, can provide some of your most interesting writing. Is the speaker delusional? Is he settling for the one flawed lover who will have him? Might the word lie hint at her possible infidelity, that she lies sexually with another? Stephen Booth's essay, entitled Love Lies Bleeding, a reading of Sonnet 138, reminds us that lies here means both telling a lie and also lies with men. Now, just a clarification, when my students write research papers, they need a digital source, a book source, and a peer source. So Stephen Booth is a scholar, and I'm just pretending that he's a student in my class who wrote an essay called Love Lies Bleeding, a nod to Elton John. It's a great Elton John lyric, reading of Sonnet 138. So if Booth was a student in my class, we'd cite him this way. Booth, and it's page 1 of his essay. So here we go. So Booth reminds us that lies does have this double meaning. Okay. So Booth helps me answer my questions. And when you can ask questions and then have a scholar sort of corroborate them or support the answers that you think are there, that's just really helpful creating your credibility as a writer. The following 2 lines propose a possible resolution to the sudden problem of the beloved's fidelity. So is she a maid or a virgin, or is she sleeping around? The speaker continues, that she might think me some untutored youth, unlearned in the world's false subtleties. So what do I think? The speaker presumes that the deceitful woman believes he is naive enough to presume her to be honest and virtuous, going so far as to bring him back to the subservience of his childhood classroom with words like untutored and unlearned. So what I'm doing here is taking diction or word choice and creating a tone and a mood, the mood of subservience in a classroom. The speaker says, she looks at me like I'm untutored and unlearned. To the speaker's imagination, she's the cruel and evil schoolmistress who preys upon his innocence. And then my final comment, hardly the foundation of a real love match. So let's go to the next body paragraph about the next few lines of the poem. As the poem moves to the next quatrain, the speaker qualifies his previous statement regarding his beloved's perception of him. So again, topic, sentence. This is what this paragraph will be doing. And I also have a little transitional moment here, which is sometimes good to do. I know where I am in the poem now, so I just need my quote sentence here. The speaker begins in confusion, and he asserts the following thing. Thus, vainly thinking that she thinks me young, which is asserting that, but that he's also confused. He stops himself, although she knows my days are past the best. So I'm going to give my thoughts here. According to the speaker, his lover thinks he's young, but then euphemistically confesses that his days are past the best. The speaker reveals that he's perceived to be young in terms of emotional maturity, not of literal age. So my inference here is drawing a distinction. Yet the beloved vainly thinks he's naive. Here the double meaning of words rears his head again, and the reader's left to wonder whether the beloved's belief in the speaker's naivete is unfounded or based on her own self-absorption. I'm not sure. Speaker then returns to the theme of his opening lines. He continues, again, the speaker with a verb. Simply, I credit her false speaking tongue. On both sides thus is simple truth suppressed. He returns to the idea that his lover's a liar and that truth is stopped on both sides of her tongue, on both sides of the relationship. Speaker simply acknowledges her lies, either reflecting a clear bluntness of recognition or maybe even believing her own insults about. You'll notice, look, I'm hedging a lot because I'm not sure what the words mean, because they mean more than one thing, which is the topic of my paper. So simply, it either reflects clear bluntness of recognition or that he maybe believes her own insults about him. And this is where I borrow from a scholar. Edward Snow writes in Loves of Comfort and Despair, a reading of Shakespeare's Sonnet 138. And I've already gone over this, but I'll read it again. The language expresses an ambivalence while giving the feeling of having resolved it. There's no big words there. I think you'll know what ambivalence means. Kind of not sure, right? So the literal meaning of the language in the poem is that of ambivalence, playing with language, words meaning more than one thing. But the feeling of the poem is that of resolution and clarity. So that's a really important distinction. Simply can mean naively or foolishly, but also straightforwardly, candidly, absolutely, or without reserve. So the scholar's saying this one word Shakespeare uses has 6 possible meanings. Similarly, the simple truth can be suppressed in favor of either multiple lies or a more complex truth. contradictory perspectives are acknowledged. So I've already said in a previous slide, this scholar is commenting on how he's playing with words in a similar way that I'm commenting on, so I'm definitely using that to support my argument. Starting here is something that I'm not sure if I agree with. Contradictory perspectives are acknowledged, yet tonally, so then I'll stop and go to the next slide. Yet tonally, it is the positive meanings that achieve priority. The feel of the line conveys not cynicism, wrath, or division, but an ethically invested clarity. Again, you could spend a day just thinking about what the heck that means. And I think I've broken it down a bit. So there's a difference between, Snow says there's a difference between what the words literally mean on the page versus what the words make us feel. So that adds to the messiness. So here we go. Snow, I have to talk about what literally just happened. And again, as I said in a previous slide, when you're quoting a difficult text or a difficult piece of scholarship, sometimes the first thing to do is just to make sure you know, to break it down for your reader of your essay, to make sure your reader knows exactly what's at least literally being said. Snow makes a distinction here by highlighting what the lines literally communicate and what the reader feels when they're communicated. The words rooted in this romantic relationship carry diverse and multiple meanings, and the speaker teeters on a verbal high wire. Again, this is a little metaphor I came up with because I think it works. When you're playing with language like this, you're not even sure what things mean. When he looks down from this high wire, the speaker sees the end of his relationship based on trickery and lying. When the speaker looks straight ahead on the high wire, he experiences the joy of enduring a challenging relationship. So when he looks down, he sees lying. When he looks ahead, he sees joy. It's my way of saying that the speaker lives in this double life. This relationship demands a double life of his. He has joy depending on how he looks at things, and he has misery based on how he looks at things. To conclude this metaphor, the speaker seems to look ahead, more than look down. When reading these same lines, Wendler states, so again, this is just adding another scholar's opinion on the same text. That's a really valuable thing to do. You most often write research papers on subjects that are complex and difficult, and I think as you grow up, the most important thing you can do in your own writing and your own research is honor the complexity of the things you're reading and not kind of make them simple formulas. So what does Wendler say about the same thing? The one thing they, two characters, both don't do in the actual present is say, the simple verb of the suppressed questions. The verb that almost burns a hole in the sonnet. Again, I love that. In the two lacerating implied statements of the silent simple truth, she is unjust, I am old. Wendler's inference here might remind us of the great Shakespearean tragedies that are full of unspoken words, failed interactions, and soliloquies that need to be dialogues. Again, just to remind you, I got the idea of incorporating Shakespeare plays from Snow's article. I didn't use the quotes themselves, but reading that page gave me the idea that one of the dynamics of this sonnet is unspoken moments between lovers, and that's obviously a hugely important theme in the plays. So making that connection is actually another interesting thing going on. Wendler's implicit conclusion is that the tragedy of this relationship is the absence of direct communication, a Hamlet writ small. What exact truth is suppressed here remains a mystery, although one presumes it's the ironic truth of her own deceitfulness. There seems to be no hope for them. And this is my big takeaway. This is, again, the higher level of reading that you want to aspire to, where you think about the text yourself, you incorporate the thoughts of scholars and people that spend their life thinking about this, and then you say something. You step sort of outside of your paper and look at it, and you say, all right, what's going on? How do I synthesize this? How do I comment? How do I take a stand? Here we go. Snow senses the poem's ultimate positive message, but Wendler's case is more compelling. Take a stand. Agree and disagree with people. Just because a scholar has a nice book-lined office at a college campus doesn't mean that scholar has a more compelling case than you. Okay? So Wendler's case, you're saying, is more compelling than Snow's, because every moment of implied truth in the poem carries with it the lies that are explicit and not necessarily named, the lies that burn a hole through the poem and the relationship at its heart. Okay, what else? Well, most relationships would terminate at the suppression of truth. Something in this speaker moves him to keep exploring his heart for signs of hope. Again, what's this? A topic sentence. So what is this paragraph going to do? Look at how the speaker explores his heart for signs of hope. So I have a context sentence. He begins his next line of reasoning with two questions. And then I have the speaker and I have a verb. He asks, "But wherefore says she not she is unjust, and wherefore say not I that I am old?" Again, I've broken down that very odd syntax. I've talked about the word wherefore, so I know what's going on by now. The speaker, so I'm gonna talk about this before I get to scholarship. Speaker still wonders why his lover remains deceitful and why she'll not admit that he is in fact old and not young and naive. I think this is important here. All I just did was in one sentence summarize this very difficult double question that's worded very strangely. That's not a bad thing to do. Just don't do it for more than a sentence. No one wants to read a book report on Sonnet 138. So here's my comment, my inference. This is not a new thought. Instead, it's voiced as a question rather than a statement, as if the speaker is still open to new interpretations of a situation. So what did I just do? I noticed this thought's not new. I noticed that it's simply a rewording of something else that was already said. But then I asked why that's important or interesting. And it's important and interesting because it seems like what the speaker's doing is telling us, by asking these questions, that he's still probing his heart. He's still open to new interpretations of this difficult relationship. He's almost thinking to himself and then letting us in that thought process, that overhearing. Perhaps he's given up trying to make sense of her thought process, and he's retreated into mere questions, almost out of desperation. He continues, not quite directly answering his own questions, so this is a context sentence for the next quote. Speaker, verb. He adds, "Oh, love's best habit is in seeming trust, and age in love loves not to have years told." So I'm going to go to scholarship now. As Stephen Booth states, seeming trust can indicate a pretense of mutual faith, a pretense of fidelity. A pretense is like a mask, like an illusion, like the sense of mutual faith and the sense of fidelity, but not the real thing. Seeming trust. Seem like this person's trustworthy, trusting me. Booth continues, Shakespeare customarily associates clothing with deceit. Okay, so stop there. This is why we do scholarship. I could have written 1,000 papers on Sonnet 138 and not come up with that. This takes someone who's read Shakespeare for his whole life to know that connection is there. So that's interesting. Shakespeare customarily associates clothing with deceit, concealment, and pretense, with trying to seem other than what one actually is, a seemly trustfulness and an appropriate fidelity. So where is clothing? I'm guessing it's at the word seam, that clothes are stitched made out of seams. So let's see what he says next. The literal meaning of seeming here elicits, and we'll go to the next slide, a lack of certainty, the mere appearance of trust. And Booth's reflection on the word's many meanings magnifies the beloved's conviction, or worse, her truthfulness in the relationship. Finally, the speaker leaves the comfort or discomfort of his own mind and draws conceptual conclusions about love itself, admitting that the appearance of trust and the illusion of perpetual youth provide a foundation for mature relationships, which, if you're in a mature relationship, that's pretty disturbing. Approaching the poem's final couplet, one isn't sure whether the speaker is delusional or actually content. So this last sentence serves as a transition to the last body paragraph, right? Nearing the end of his poem, the speaker approaches his conclusion with a final rhyming couplet in which he accepts the link between sexual union and verbal mistrust, and that duplicity itself is an important part of the relationship's survival. So basically, the final topic sentence says that the ending of the poem shows us that the speaker is saying that lying is a part of this relationship, a really important part. Okay. So he ends his sonnet. So this is kind of like a context sentence and a speaker verb. He ends. Therefore I lie with her and she with me, and in our faults by lies we flattered be. So I have my inference here. After the first 12 lines of the poem, the word lie here in the final couplet has a peculiar strength or potency, as it reflects their ongoing sexual union even amid their mutual deceit. Then I add Miss Wendler again, who's an awesome reader. Helen Wendler argues of the beloved that her truth and his youth are both equally lies. In his euphemism, "she knows my days are past the best," shows that he even wants to lie to himself, not merely have his woman lie to him. So, "she knows my days are past the best" is from a previous line. So you might wonder, why are you using this quote for a paragraph that focuses on the final couplet of the poem? It's because I'm looking at the word lie. And that's what she's talking about here. The pattern of lies, right? And here I go referring to other texts. This willful self-deception recalls Hamlet's antic disposition and Iago's insistence that I am not what I am. If you're running this paper at the end of your senior year of high school and you have some experience with these two plays, great. Go find those quotes like I did and cite them. And they fortify the sense that this is a pattern in Shakespeare. This isn't just a Sonnet 138 thing. The notion of truth and lying in relationships is almost like a leitmotif in Shakespeare. If you don't know to do that, then just talk about the text. There's plenty to go on. And like tragic villains, the speaker's words in the sonnet ring false, even when he appears to bare his soul and reveal his innermost vulnerabilities. And that's sort of the great villains in Shakespeare, whether they're Richard III or Othello, or later Macbeth, one might argue, Claudius and Hamlet. When they seem to be most honest is often when they're at their most sort of disturbingly villainous and deceitful, as Hamlet says of his evil uncle, that one may smile and be a villain. We cannot really believe him, even at his most believable. That might be my most important sort of phrase in the whole paper, that even at his most believable, the speaker's not believable. And the final line of the sonnet is a blunt admission that the faults of the couple, presumably their age and their lack of truthfulness, are glossed over by their pattern of lies, thereby propelling their relationship forward by groundless flattery. This is my own interpretation. The self-questioning and delusion of the earlier lines have resolved themselves, I would proofread that, resolved themselves into an honest admission, albeit about deceit itself. So the only thing they're truthful about is lying. That's basically my ultimate takeaway here. Okay. Let's see where we go. Let's see where we go now. Considering this poem again, I'm on the conclusion now. One realizes that the opening 16 syllables, while initially seen as positive, are actually themselves deceitful. So this is a moment where I've done all this work, and I'm actually showing my reader that there's been a development and growth in my own understanding of the poem. You know, these things don't come down from the heavens and just explain themselves to us, right? Admitting that one's love is made of truth seems as close to a Valentine's Day card as Shakespeare would ever get. However, the opening line is, when my love swears that she's made of truth. And here's my, everyday life question. Sometimes the most important thing to do isn't to think like a scholar, it's to think like a human being walking around in the world. And the fact of the matter is that if someone were to say to you, my love swears she's made of truth, you can always ask the question, what kind of person says that? I think that's a really important question. Under what circumstances would someone in any relationship have to swear that she's being honest? Duress, suspicion, and paranoia provide the emotional backdrop of this entire relationship in poem. The woman has to defend her romantic loyalty, and even so doing is held under suspicion, hence the sonnet. Curiously, the opening positive syllables actually foreshadow the darker tone of the rest of the poem. Words take on multiple meanings, and every romantic thought lives on a kind of verbal quicksand. That's my metaphor. You can come up with another one or just speak literally, where words cannot hold on to a one solid meaning. Again, proofreading, to one solid meaning. We're not sure whether the concluding moment of surrender suggests the relationship's doom or an honest, mature acknowledgement that a certain degree of deceit is needed to live in a long, mature romance. We do know that we leave the poem with no small amount of suspicion about two things: the future of these lovers who need to constantly defend themselves to each other, and whether the woman feels as defensive as the male speaker thinks she needs to be. So that's my conclusion. I have some conclusions I've drawn, and I have some questions about the future of the relationship, but I've tried to synthesize the problems and the obstacles and the roadblocks and comment on them in the conclusion. And last but not least, the bane of the existence of most student writers is the formality of things like works cited pages. Few tips. Once you have your sources lined up, before you even write your final draft, compose your revised perfect works cited page, so that at midnight on the night before, not only are you asleep, but you're not trying to figure out where periods and commas go in your works cited page. I've shown you down below here that this is actually the easy part of writing a research paper. Synthesizing complicated thoughts about a complicated text should be the mental challenge. There's a new edition of the MLA as of 2016, an 8th edition of the MLA book, and there's some changes that you want to be aware of. But please don't make this the most mentally taxing part of the writing process, okay? This is the website I would really recommend, is the one in blue right here, the Owl, Purdue Owl. This is really, really good. And also, you always have your librarians. Not the day stuff is due, but instead, later on early in the process, they can help. So again, I go down the line here, and I go in alphabetical order by author. It's all pretty much clear, but I would just really suggest doing this really well in advance. I think that's really, really important. So hopefully this tutorial has helped, and good luck with your writing.